So let's now get started. Let's jump into the main topic of today. So as I said before, we're going to be discussing we're going to discuss our airside modules, and the first one in the list is Airside Aircraft. Now this is the core module for aircraft ground operations. Now let's have a look. This module can be used to assess airport capacity and optimize your operations. Okay, so when I'm talking about airport capacity, I'm being very broad here. Okay, you can use it for runway capacity study. You can use it if you want to assess the capacity of your gates, your aprons, or maybe your de-icing platforms. Maybe you want to know if 4, 5, 6 de-icing de-icing stations is enough. Capacity related to standoff positions, or capacity related to your taxiway system. So AirTOP is a very complete tool that you can use it for your capacity studies as you wish. This module can also be very useful if you want to evaluate different airport layout designs. So not necessarily if you're building a new airport, but just if you're building a new terminal that has, you will get different possibilities, and you want to evaluate every one of them and see what impact a terminal layout design has on, for example, delays, ground delays. Perhaps those have an impact on a main taxiway segment to which they connect. So you can make those layout evaluations and compare them together, and then make a more informed decision of which terminal layout, or let's say a new apron layout, or a new runway in your airport, what effect would that have in your operations. AirTOP can also be used for taxi flow optimization. So if you have identified a hotspot or a bottleneck in your airport, and for which you think that a taxi flow optimization might be the solution, then AirTOP is a tool that you can use to confirm that and evaluate it and get some metrics out of it to compare. Okay, it can also be very useful in turnaround management. Okay, to evaluate your turnaround management. So in terms of, for example, your towing strategies, if you are considering towing aircraft earlier to a remote stand, so that AirTOP can also help you evaluate those possibilities, so you make informed decisions. Now, this module, Airside Aircraft, can be seamlessly extended to connect with other modules, which are the TMA TRACON, especially if you have a big, if you're working it's a big airport, you have most likely a complex airspace, and sometimes the airspace, the TRACON or the TMA, has a direct impact into on the capacity of your airport. So sometimes if you have, for example, some terrain around the airport for which you need aircraft to fly, maintaining certain separation minima, then that translates down to the runway, meaning that the runway can only process aircraft at so many intervals, and that also translates all the way back to the gates, because gates cannot just release traffic if the runway is a bottleneck. So when sometimes the airspace is also going to be a limitation to your runway capacity, then that can also be connected to this module. Needless to say, the airside vehicles modules as well. So if you want to assess a towing capacity problems, then that can be seamlessly connected to it, or eventually the flow management modules. So if you have problems in your upper airspace that have to restrict your runway capacity, and you want to have that in your model as well, then a connection with that module is also possible. Okay, so that is the basics of this module. Now let me talk a little bit about how scenario definition and modeling works. Okay, and I'm going to give you also a brief demo in a moment. So airport infrastructure, what can you model with AirTOP? You name it. With Airside Aircraft module, you can define new taxiways, the parking positions or gates, de-icing aprons, the location of runway entries, runway exits, runway crossings. There's more to that. You can define the location of stop bars, the standoff positions, or pulling procedures. You can specify the location of your pushback and pull procedures. So all of that by simply clicking on the map with an adjacent information display. So let me show you how that looks. So this is AirTOP. So this is what AirTOP looks like. You can see that it's essentially it has a map view display here on the top with some tables here in the bottom. Now what we're going to do here is we are going to start adding. There we go. We are going to start adding some exploring. So here I'm just moving around the map and trying to select my taxiway segments. So it's very interactive. You can select your different taxiway segments and interact them. And we can also add satellite imagery in the background as I just did. So it's very useful if you can add that satellite imagery so you can make changes to your airport layout quite quickly. In this case, we are going to quickly add some more taxiway segments and some parking positions in this apron. So I am extending here this taxiway segment, creating a new segment, and just showing you how interactive it is, how easy it is to start creating more taxiway segments. I'm going to create here one parking position, the location for one aircraft to park. And in this entry segment, let's just add some curvature to the segment. As you can see, you don't have to approximate a curved segment with several smaller segments. AirTOP allows you to just introduce a curvature in your segment, so that looks cleaner. It's easier to model, easier to maintain, and also much faster. Okay, so just as that, we created a that small apron. We added 2 parking positions, and what I'm showing you here next is that you can easily snap to 45-degree angles. So sometimes like this, I can quickly snap there to make a 45-degree turn, which in turn helps me to make a very nice curved segment as it would look in reality in an airport. So there it has, AirTOP has a lot of built-in tools to help you interact with it. Now what I'm going to do next here is adding a parking position. So as easy as clicking on the menu and saying I want to add a new parking position, and by clicking on that point that I just created, now as you can see on your screens, we just created another parking position. So it is as simple as that to interact with AirTOP. That basically essentially what I did was telling AirTOP that now that I have all these points, I want to assign a role to this point. And in this particular case, I said this point is going to have the role of a parking position. In a similar way, I can do it for stop bars, I can do it for standoff locations, I can do it for de-icing stations, runway entries, runway exits, you name it. So that's how you can work in a very interactive way with AirTOP. So as you can see, in a short period of time, we just created a small apron with 2 stands, 2 parking positions. You can imagine how fast you can go in creating, if you want to create a new apron or a new terminal in your building. That's not a lot of work in AirTOP. I always say that creating the infrastructure is the least of your problems. Okay, that's the easiest thing. Okay, now what does take some more time and effort is creating the rules, the operation rules. How is that infrastructure going to be used? Okay, and that doesn't take too much time in AirTOP. That does in real life. If you're a consultant, or if you are an an air navigation services provider, you know that these operational rules, it does take some time to discuss with the operational experts and get their input on how do you operate your airport here. So we know that working with fast time simulation models can be tricky because you need a lot of data, a lot of input coming from the airport. So we have done our best here to simplify that process in AirTOP, to make it straightforward, and to present you with all the information that you need to be able to get to that state. Okay, so that brings me to the next slide, which is the scenario definition and modeling. And here I'm going to specifically talk about the operational business rules. How is the airport operated? Okay, so that's our next topic. So it is possible to define dynamic rules of how the airport operates, for example, for taxiway reroutings. So you could always have your default path from your parking position to the runway, but that default path could change because of traffic conditions. So sometimes if you have a bottleneck in a particular, or you have some opposing traffic in a particular taxiway segments, you want to deviate from that path, but not all the time. So only in certain conditions. So that's possible in AirTOP. Runway direction changes as well, so you're able to say at what time of the day you want to change your runway direction. So let's say you want to operate in north flow until 10 a.m. and from 10 a.m. on you want to operate in south flow. So that AirTOP also supports those runway changes in the middle of your simulation. Gate allocation too, for example. So you can ask AirTOP to you can provide AirTOP with a set of rules that indicate which, for example, which airlines or which aircraft types should park in which stands in your airport. What is the preferred stands for which airlines? So if you have some legacy airlines, you can also accommodate them wherever they're usually parked. Or if you, instead of that, there's a group of airlines that you prefer to handle in a remote stand. There's a set of rules that you can define to specify that too. Push and pull procedures. So if you have some pockets in your apron layouts, then it's very likely that you have a push and pull procedure to for aircraft pushing back. So that's also possible. You can specify the push and pull procedure for every parking position in your airport. So you can specifically say until which point the aircraft would have to be pulled, and what's the engine and the turning on of the engine policy. Do you want to start turning on the engine while the aircraft is being pulled, or only start turning on engines after the aircraft has reached its pull location? Okay. Okay, so also de-icing, you can decide to make your de-icing at the apron or the gate, and many more. So it's not possible to give you a demo of all of these situations because of limitations that we have on time, but I'm going to try and give you some short demonstrations. Okay. So here what we have first is a parallel taxiway dependency. Okay, so this situation happens sometimes where we have here in this particular case these three taxiway segments, and the center taxiway segment is going to be used by heavy aircraft, and the outer two are going to be used by a lighter aircraft. Okay, but by smaller aircraft. So this is what we see essentially when we have a big aircraft, they have to taxi in the middle segment. Okay, so what happens if you have opposing traffic? It's quite simple in AirTOP. You just you can create rules that force this aircraft the smaller aircraft here to wait on the north because the big aircraft is making use of a center taxiway segment, or the opposite could be true. The big aircraft has to wait for the smaller aircraft to clear that piece of taxiway segment. Okay, so it can also, this situation, this restriction can happen in many directions. You can also have the situation in which they're going into the same direction, so they both have to coordinate and wait for each other before they can continue taxiing in the same direction. This can also restrict the pushback of a big aircraft, because as you can see here, the pushback of the big aircraft is not in the way of the taxiing path of the small aircraft, but still by pushing back it will be blocking the wingspan of the big aircraft, will be blocking the taxi path of the smaller aircraft. So in this case also our big aircraft waits until that small aircraft has passed and then start the pushback. So all those interactions are very important, and as you can see they can be modeled in a very realistic way in AirTOP, which results then in accurate measurements of delay. All the time that that big aircraft was at the gate waiting to push back and couldn't push back because there was a smaller aircraft blocking the way, then that counts as delay in AirTOP. And so we can measure that delay took place at the gate, and that was because of traffic, so that at the end of our simulation we can have very accurate estimates of delay at the different phases and also different locations in our airport. So that's very useful, and this is valuable information that you cannot measure in real operations, in real life. Okay, so you cannot always have a timer wherever you want in real life, but here with the simulation you can play back, go to that point in time in which something happened and measured for how long was my aircraft delayed here and how often does that happen. So that's why this makes simulation a very powerful tool. Okay, so AirTOP can also be used, this module can also be used for stand and gate allocation purposes. So here what I have, and what I'm showing you here is the typical Gantt chart for stand allocation. Here on the left side, we have our gates and our gate numbers, and we also have some color coding here. We can see that, let me see if I can change my pointer to show it to you better. Okay, so what we have here is some color coding. We have in green first of all, let's inspect at one of these blocks. You can see that there's an arrowhead on both ends of a block, and sometimes there's a little square. Now that little square represents an aircraft that has been towed. Okay, that is coming from a different parking position. And we also have some color coding, green, showing that there's apparently nothing wrong with the planning of that flight. But here we automatically see in red a situation that might become a problem, because we see that these two flights are planned so close to each other that most likely is going to lead to a conflict. So if the first aircraft is just a little bit late, or the second aircraft is just a little bit early, then they're going to have a conflict there, and most likely the second aircraft will have to wait for its stand to be free. Okay, so that this can also be very interactive. Now here what I'm going to do is click on one of these blocks, and AirTOP automatically shows me, highlights for me to which stand this aircraft arrived. It arrived to stand 2, and now it has been towed to a stand 6. I can also click on one of those stands that shows the conflict, and I can here enable edit mode. And after enabling edit mode, I can just click the flight and drag it. Now here I see some color also. Black represents those gates that are not physically possible for this aircraft, and so I dragged it to a yellow stand, which means it's suitable for this aircraft size. Okay, so you can there immediately see, you were able to immediately see every time we had black, that was a stand that could not fit the aircraft. Red was the stand that could have fitted the aircraft, but it was already occupied or blocked until I had to find one free spot. So it's, as you can see, this can be done before simulation if you want to, so that you can have a stand allocation before simulation runs. And that's very valuable. That's very important. Why would you want to allocate your stands before running the simulation? So because then you might be able to measure, for example, how many gate changes have you had with this traffic schedule at the end of the day. Or you might want to study how many standoff aprons do I need, standoff positions do I need. So a standoff is just a parking, a temporal parking, remote parking position where your aircraft can wait until your gate, till its gate is free. So how many of those do you need to ensure operations at a given service level, for example? To be able to make those studies, you need to first have a plan of action. So that's why AirTOP already provides you with this stand and gate allocation tool. Okay. Okay, so needless to say, you have a lot of reporting functionality in AirTOP. It's highly customizable and can be visualized and extracted using hundreds of built-in reports. And what's important, that these reports can also be exported as spreadsheets or SQL databases if you want to do external processing and analysis. So you can immediately inspect the results of your simulation AirTOP, but if for some reason you have an automated procedure in your company, or you want to automatically get those results and put them in, let's say, a dashboard solution like nowadays is very popular, so you can also do that.